Hi, today's topic is external environment. And today we'll look at the basic concepts such as inflation, the gross domestic product, ВВП, and balance of trade. We're going to describe the business cycle. We're going to discuss the concepts of corporate social responsibility and creating shared value concepts. We're going to apply the SWOT analysis that you're already familiar with. And we'll look at Porter's 5 forces for making better decisions, whether to start a business in this particular region or not. And then we'll look at some business model canvas. If you do remember, the value proposition canvas was quite a powerful tool to understand and propose the value to the customer needs and wants. In this case, we're going to look at a more comprehensive model of which is called business model canvas. Okay, now let's talk about inflation. Inflation is the measure of increase in average price for level of in average price of goods and services over the time. So you may have heard about in variety of news that the inflation rate this year has been between 7 to 8% or 6.5%, whatever. So that means that this is like an average change in the average in the price of goods and services in a country. Okay, well, basically what government wants to do is they want to decrease this inflation rate so that the change in the price for products and services this year is not going up. So very like the government is quite keen on keeping the inflation rate as minimal as possible. Unemployment rate is the extent of people being unemployed, meaning that this is actually the measure when there are some people who are willing to work but they just can't find a job. So you can't just say unemployment rate is just number of people who don't work, because among those people who do not work, there are some people who cannot work. That's why they're not working. But unemployment rate is specifically about the number of people who are willing to work and can work but can't find a job. And obviously we're trying to decrease this unemployment rate. Gross domestic product, you can think about, for the simplicity, let's take one company which is producing some products. Okay, now the value of these products produced, for example, by this company, you can think of as GDP of this particular company. Now, the GDP of the country-wise is an overall value of products and services produced in this particular country by the businesses. Okay, so GDP is a measure of how much value the country-wise it's actually generating. And obviously, we're trying to increase this one. Now, balance of payment. We're going to look at balance of payment. I'm sure you're familiar with the terms called export and import. So export is when you produce in a domestically produce it, and then you sell it to other countries, not here, but to other countries abroad. Whereas importing means that you buy from other countries and bring from abroad to the domestic. Now, what is balance of payment? The balance of payment is a difference between export level and import level. So it's good when the country is exporting as much as possible and importing as least as possible, because in this case we're going to have a very high balance of payment, and this is the subtraction between the export and import. And that means we do have economic independence, and that means that we're not we do not depend on other countries. Okay. Now let's talk about inflation rate. Now, if we look at for example, different goods and services. So if we think about so in this particular chart, these prices are true for 2016, and let's say that these prices are going to be the case in 2046. Now, this is the same thing. This is the same dinner. This is the same, let's say, TV and product, and this is the same coffee. But things, they tend to devalue, meaning that the price for the same thing goes up and up every day and every year, and this is called inflation. Now, if we had to calculate specifically what was the average annual inflation rate specifically for this particular dinner, okay, now we know that in final period, which is 2046, that was $29 and then $12.75. And when we actually take it to the square of 30, which is the period of time, and in this case, the difference between nowadays, well, in 2016, let's say, and 2046 is 30 years. That's why we're going to take it as a square of 30, and then you can calculate 1.0277. If you subtract this with 1, you're going to take 0.277, and if you multiply it by 100, then you will work out that you have 2.77% of the inflation rate. And you can calculate for the genes. This is the same genes, by the way. In economics and business, there is such a term which is called compounded annual growth rate, which shows the average annual growth rate, which is, well, in this particular, this is inflation rate. So we do the same thing. We divide up 49 by 34, and then we take the square of 30, which is the time period in between. And then you work it out as 1.22% of the inflation rate on average from 2016 to 2017, from 2017 to 2018. Every single year, if you look at the average inflation rate, that accounts for 1.22% in this case. Obviously, this is averaged. This is not like, it's not going to be all the time 1.22. It can vary depending on the balance and the trade of balance as well, and economic situation in a country. Now, so what we're saying is GDP is increasing. So this is the Statista data, and it's hopefully going to increase. And also the National Bank, if you have heard from news, they're saying continuously using the term the target inflation corridor, the target inflation interval. We are aiming for like 6%, 7%, depending on the economic scenario. And then the National Bank is actually planning to achieve 4% of inflation rate, which is good compared to nowadays. But even then, 4%, what does it mean? 4% after 30 years, so if we say that 2000, for example, again, from 2016 to 2046, if we project this average 4% inflation rate, in 30 years' time, on average, the things will get more expensive by 3.24 folds. So if something will cost you like 100 tenge nowadays, in 30 years' time, even if you achieve this 4%, which is very ambitious, by the way, it still will take you 324 tenge for the same thing in 30 years' time. Okay, let's talk about the business cycle. Now, in this one, we have, it's like on x-axis, we do have like ROTE, and then on y-axis, we do have a GDP. Now, at the beginning, there is a growth stage. So gradually, the economy of a country starts to grow. The businesses, they speed up, they produce more value, they can pay more to the employees, they hire more people, the unemployment rate goes down. So the living standards of people actually increases just because people are getting richer. Now there is a boom stage. There is a boom stage when people have relatively lots of money. And what do you do when you have lots of money? The human nature, the human being usually will tell you that you should actually buy more things. So when the people's income increases, the natural thing to happen would be that the spending also increases. Now, when the spending increases, what does it mean? Do you remember the supply and demand rule? So the demand increases because nowadays, well, at the boom stage, people can afford more. So that means that more people will want to buy iPhones, more and more people will want to buy some fancy cars, houses, and so on. But in this case, as the demand grows, inevitably, businesses will increase their prices. That's the law of the supply and demand, if you do remember. Now, at some point, the businesses, they actually keep up increasing the prices up because there is a demand. But at some point, the products and services, they become expensive, and the growth rate of the price increase actually outweighs or exceeds the growth rate of people's income. And in this case, people can no longer afford the same goods and services in the same amounts, and the recession starts. The recession starts. Why? Because people can no longer afford the same goods and services, or not at least in the same amounts. And in this case, businesses will struggle to keep up the same amount of sales. And in this case, the demand goes down, the less expenditure, the less spending, and the recession comes in. Now, the slump is a serious and long drawn-out recession. Unemployment is the highest. Now, for the businesses as well, do you know what happens with the businesses when they have a lot of money? When there is a high demand and when the businesses, they increase the prices, when the revenues are increasing, what will naturally happen to most of the businesses, they will increase their costs as well. They're going to hire more people. They're going to they're going to have some capital expenditures. They're going to buy some equipment and machinery in a hope that they will expand. But it doesn't happen all the time. I mean, at some point, at some saturation point, let's say, the demand just goes down. And in this case, the business struggles to have the same revenues, and they also have increased their fixed costs already. So the fixed costs are already high, and when the revenue goes down, there is a what? There is a deficit. There is a loss by the businesses. And in this case, what businesses do, they're going to say, okay, we do have a problem here. That's why we need to decrease our costs. And they start to decrease their costs, their fixed costs. They start to lay off people. They start to decrease some other expenditures, which is not good for the economy as well, because that means these are the layoffs. And that means that those businesses, by the way, they also reduce the expenditures, and they no longer buy the same volume of products from other businesses, from other suppliers. Now, hopefully, after slump, okay, the growth begins again. And this is like a cyclical thing. It's a cyclical thing. Now, the big, there are like shorter cycles and bigger cycles, but what most people say, the economists say that the big crises, they actually come and occur every like 80 to 90 years, and the smaller crises, they occur every 5 to 10 years. Okay. Now I think we are facing this small crisis. Hopefully it's a small crisis, not the big one, but it's actually coming. Now, as I said before, export is good because this brings money into the country. You're getting more cash, which is good. Importing means you pay using this cash and buy the products from abroad. Now, if the balance of trade is negative, which means that import exceeds the export, then the country starts to run out of US dollars. US dollars is a international currency that most businesses and countries prefer to use. It's very liquid. Everyone likes dollars, and eventually the country they start to run out of US dollars. And in this particular case, the country may have some deficit of cash, and in this case, they can borrow from abroad, from international banks and from international organizations. which is not good because you have to pay interests. The money is not free. Okay, I'm sure you'll be able to do this one. It's very simple example. I'm not gonna stop here. So let's continue. Do you remember the location decision making? Now, businesses, they used to consider only internal costs. Remember, we said that what does it take me to expand? What does it take the business to expand in this location or location B or location A? But is it actually enough? Is it enough only to consider those costs from the business perspective only without actually considering other stakeholders' costs? Yes, other stakeholders also they may have and incur some costs when you begin to expand. I'm going to give you some example with a chemical plant. So a chemical plant, they're actually planning to open a new factory near a park used by a local residents. Now, if you think about this one, there are some private costs and there are some private benefits. When I say private, I mean for the business, this is internal costs and benefits. Now, the most obvious benefit is going to be the new and increased revenue from the new sales because you're going to produce more products. Obviously, the business should have some costs. There is a cost of land, there is a cost of construction, new labor costs, additional labor costs, cost of running the plant, and transportation costs. But we also need to be aware of other stakeholders' costs. Now, what does it take them? Now, the external cost, there is a waste produced by a business, by a chemical plant, which will eventually pollute the environment, which means that the society may not be happy about that. There is smokes and fumes that will damage the health of the public. The parkland will not be available. However, there are some external benefits for them as well. That means that the society will get more jobs available, and other businesses, local businesses, they also may benefit from a new giant chemical plant because this giant chemical plant is likely to use the local businesses' services and products because they just need it. More tax for government. Government will also benefit from that because the company, the chemical plant, expands and therefore they have more revenue, likely more net profit, and therefore they're going to pay taxes for the government, and government is kind of happy about that as well because they're going to have more social spending. So in this case, it's quite difficult to say something like neatly and say this needs to be done in this way or that way, because you have to balance them and you have to look at the advantages and disadvantages. Now, again, here we can't just say, okay, we have 3 advantages versus 1 disadvantage, let's just go for that. No, it's not. You have to quantify these factors as much as you can, because in this case you're gonna make more accurate and more precise decisions. So if the waste from the chemical plant is a big concern, then that means that the company should take care of this pollution, employing some technologies and utilizing some technologies that will prevent these wastes, that will prevent these smokes and fumes. If you can do that and compensate something with something else, those parklands, for example, then in this case you might be sustainable in the long run. Now, businesses, and this is the basic topic of today's lecture, the businesses should strive to create a sustainable strategy for the development. It's not about 1 week. It's not about 1 year. It's not even about 5 years' time benefit. Businesses, they should look at sustainable growth and sustainable development in the long run for the future. Okay? We're going to pause now and we're going to continue with another subtopic.